Book of Esther. As King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne, which was at the citadel in Susa, he gave a banquet. When the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown in order to display her beauty. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command. Then the king became very angry. According to law, what is to be done with Queen Vashti because she did not obey the command of King Ahasuerus? Let a royal edict be issued so that it cannot be repealed, and let the king give her royal position to another who is more worthy than she. Then the king's attendants said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king. Gather every beautiful young virgin to the citadel of Susa, to the harem. Then let the young lady who pleases the king be queen in place of Vashti." And the matter pleased the king. Now there was at the citadel in Susa a Jew named Mordecai, who had been taken into exile from Jerusalem with the captives. He was bringing up Hadassah, that is, Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had no father or mother. Now the young lady was beautiful of form and appearance, and when her father and her mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. Esther did not make known her people or her kindred, for Mordecai had instructed her that she should not. Every day Mordecai walked back and forth in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was. Now the turn of each young lady came to go in to King Ahasuerus after the end of her 12 months under the regulations for the women. For the days of their beautification were completed as follows: 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with spices and the cosmetics for women. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus to his royal palace. The king loved Esther more than all the women, and she found favor and kindness with him more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. While Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, 2 of the king's officials who guarded the door became angry and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. But the plot became known to Mordecai, and he told Queen Esther, and Esther told the king in Mordecai's name. The plot was written in the book of the Chronicles in the king's presence. After these events, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman and advanced him and established his authority over all the princes who were with him. All the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, as the king had commanded. But Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage. The reason he had told the king's servants was because he was a Jew. In the first month, the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, that is, the lot, was cast before Haman for each day in each month. And it fell on the 12th month, the month Adar. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of all other people, and they do not observe the king's laws. So it is not in the king's interest to let them remain. Let it be decreed that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to those who carry on the king's business, to put into the king's treasuries." Then the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the enemy of the Jews. The king said to Haman, "The silver is yours, and the people also, to do with them as you please." It was written just as Haman commanded, to each province according to its script, each people according to its language, being written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's signet ring. Letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to seize their possessions as plunder. Mordecai told Queen Esther's attendant about the edict for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the text of the edict, which had been issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show Esther, and for her to go in to the king to implore his favor and to plead with him for her people. Then Esther sent a reply to Mordecai. "Any man or woman who comes to the king to the inner court who is not summoned, the law is that he be put to death, unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter. And I have not been summoned to come to the king for 30 days." They related Esther's words to Mordecai. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, "Do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this?" Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go, assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens also will fast in the same way. And thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went away and did just as Esther had commanded him. When the king saw Esther, the queen, standing in the court, he extended to Esther the golden scepter. Then the king said to her, "What is troubling you, Queen Esther? And what is your request? Even to half of the kingdom it shall be given to you." Esther said, "If it pleases the king, may the king and Haman come this day to the banquet that I have prepared for him." The king said, "Bring Haman quickly, that we may do as Esther desires." At the banquet, Esther replied to the king, "If I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and do what I request, may the king and Haman come to the banquet which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king says." Then Haman went out that day, glad and pleased of heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and that he did not stand up or tremble before him, Haman was filled with anger against Mordecai. Then Zeresh, Haman's wife, and all his friends said to him, "Have a gallows 50 cubits high made, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then go joyfully with the king to the banquet." And the advice pleased Haman, so that he had the gallows made. During that night the king could not sleep, so the book of records, the Chronicles, were read to the king. It was found written what Mordecai had reported concerning 2 of the king's eunuchs who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. The king said, "What honor or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" They said, "Nothing has been done for him." So the king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace in order to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows which he had prepared for him. So Haman came in, and the king said to him, "What is to be done for the man who the king desires to honor?" And Haman said to himself, "Whom would the king desire to honor more than me?" Then Haman said to the king, "For the man whom the king desires to honor, let them bring a royal robe which the king has worn, and the horse on which the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown has been placed. And let the robe and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble princes, and let them array the man whom the king desires to honor, and lead him on horseback through the city square, and proclaim before him, 'Thus it shall be done to the man whom the king desires to honor.'" The king said to Haman, "Quickly do so for Mordecai the Jew, who is sitting at the king's gate." So Haman arrayed Mordecai and led him through the city square. Then Haman hurried home, mourning, with his head covered. The king's eunuchs arrived and hastily brought Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. The king said to Esther on the second day at the banquet, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to half of the kingdom it shall be done." Queen Esther replied, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me as my petition, and my people as my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated." Then King Ahasuerus asked Queen Esther, "Who is he, and where is he, who would presume to do thus?" Esther said, A foe and an enemy is this wicked Haman. The king arose in his anger. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs, said, Behold, indeed, the gallows standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on behalf of the king. And the king said, Hang him on it. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Queen Esther, and Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had disclosed what he was to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had taken away from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai, and Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Now you write to the Jews as you see fit, in the king's name, and seal it with a king's signet ring. For a decree which is written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's signet ring may not be revoked. The king granted the Jews who were in each and every city the right to assemble and to defend their lives, to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate the entire army of any people or province which might attack them. For the Jews there was light and gladness and joy and honor. In each and every province and in each and every city, wherever the king's commandment and his decree arrived, there was gladness and joy for the Jews, a feast and a holiday. And many among the peoples of the land became Jews, for the dread of the Jews had fallen on them. Now in the 12th month, that is, the month Adar, on the 13th day, when the king's command and edict were about to be executed, on the day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain the mastery over them, it was turned to the contrary, so that the Jews themselves gained the mastery over those who hated them. Then Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, obliging them to celebrate the 14th day of the month Adar and the 15th day of the same month annually, because on those days the Jews rid themselves of their enemies. And it was a month which was turned for them from sorrow into gladness, and from mourning into a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and rejoicing, and sending portions of food to one another, and gifts to the poor. For Haman, the adversary of all the Jews, had schemed against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast pur, that is, the lot, to disturb them and destroy them. Therefore they called these days Purim, after the name of Pur. So these days were to be remembered and celebrated throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city. And these days of Purim were not to pass away from among the Jews, or their memory fade from their descendants. The command of Esther established these customs for Purim, and it was written into the record book.